Lesson 8, American Government, the Executive Branch. This lesson explains the structure and function of the second branch of American government, the Executive Branch. The lesson is divided into two sections. The Executive Branch, Section 1. We will now begin the first section of Lesson 8. The U.S. Constitution sets up the government, defines the government, and protects basic rights of Americans. In this way, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. As the supreme law in the United States, the U.S. Constitution is above any state or federal law. The U.S. Constitution sets up a government with three branches: a legislative, an executive, and a judicial. The legislative branch is often referred to as Congress. Unlike the Congress created by the Articles of Confederation, today's Congress consists of two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The executive branch is usually referred to as the President. The executive branch consists of the President, the Cabinet, and many federal departments and agencies. The judicial branch is also called the courts. The courts consist of two levels of federal courts and the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the nation. So one part of the government does not become too powerful, the Founding Fathers gave each branch separate powers. This is called separation of powers. The Constitution also includes a system of checks and balances, which allows one part of the government to check another. For example, Congress can reject a treaty even though it was signed by the President, and the President can veto a bill for new legislation proposed by Congress. Another example is federal judges. The President appoints federal judges, but Congress must approve the candidate. Lastly, the Supreme Court can declare a law or executive action to be unconstitutional. In these ways, the separation of powers and the system of checks and balances work to limit the power of the government and to protect individual rights. The executive branch has several parts. It is comprised of the President, the Cabinet, and many federal departments and agencies. The Constitution says the executive's job is to carry out and enforce the nation's laws and preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. The President is both head of state and the head of the government. As the head of state, the President is the symbolic face of the nation and its chief diplomat. As the head of the government, the President is in charge of the executive branch. This means the President has the power to enforce laws, appoint federal judges, sign bills into law, veto bills, and to serve as the Commander-in-Chief of the military. This is the current President of the United States. The President's name is at the bottom of the picture, along with the President's political party and year the President was elected. If asked this question during your interview, you may answer with the full name or just the last name. This is the end of Section 1. We will now practice the related civics questions. Question 1. What is the supreme law of the land? The Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Question 2. What does the Constitution do? Set up the government. The Constitution sets up the government, defines the government, and protects the basic rights of Americans. Question 13. Name one branch or part of the government. The President. One branch of the government is the President. The three parts of the government are Congress, which is also called the legislative branch, the President, also known as the executive branch, and the courts, or the judicial branch. Question 14. What stops one branch of government from becoming too powerful? Checks and balances. The system of checks and balances and the separation of powers keep one branch of government from becoming too powerful. Question 15. Who is in charge of the executive branch? The President. The President is in charge of the executive branch. Question 28. What is the name of the President of the United States now? This is the current President. If asked who the President is, you may answer with the President's full name or just the last name. Question 32. Who is the Commander-in-Chief of the military? The President. The President is the Commander-in-Chief of the military. The Executive Branch, Section 2. We will now begin the second section of Lesson 8. Congress is the only branch of government that can make laws. A new law starts as an idea. Since the First Amendment gives people the right to petition the government, the idea can come from almost any person, group, or organization, a citizen, the president, even a state legislature. If the idea is accepted by a U.S. representative, the proposed law is introduced to both houses of Congress. This proposal is called a bill. The two houses of Congress then make their own version of the bill. Once each house has accepted its own version, Congress works together to make a final version. This final bill is then sent to the President to sign into law or to veto. A veto means the President has rejected the bill. If a bill is vetoed, the President must explain why and send the bill back to Congress. Congress can then change the bill and send it back to the President, or try to vote the bill into law with a 2/3 majority in Congress. It is not easy for a bill to become a law. Every year, more than 5,000 bills are introduced, but only about 150 become law. The job of the President's Cabinet is to advise the President. The Cabinet consists of the Vice President and the heads of 15 executive departments. Departments are specialized parts of the executive branch that are responsible for specific public services. For example, the U.S. Treasury prints money and collects taxes. The Department of Defense is responsible for national security and the military. And the Department of Homeland Security works to prevent terrorist attacks and responds to natural and man-made disasters. In another example of checks and balances, the President nominates the Cabinet members, but only the Senate can accept the candidate. 13 of the executive department heads are called secretaries. The 13 secretaries are the Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Labor, Secretary of State, Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of the Treasury, and the Secretary of Veteran Affairs. The last two cabinet members are the Attorney General, who oversees the Department of Justice, and the Vice President. As a member of the Cabinet, the Vice President advises the President, but performs other duties as well. For instance, the Vice President performs ceremonial duties when the President is busy, casts tie-breaking votes in the Senate, and most importantly, becomes President should the President be no longer able to serve. This is the current Vice President. The Vice President's name is at the bottom of the picture. If asked who the Vice President is, you may answer with the full name or just the last name. This is the end of Section 2. We will now practice the related civics question. Question 29. What is the name of the Vice President of the United States now? This is the current Vice President. If asked who the Vice President is, you may answer with the Vice President's full name or just the last name. Question 30. If the President can no longer serve, who becomes President? The Vice President. If the President can no longer serve, the Vice President becomes President. Question 33. Who signs bills to become laws? The President. The President must sign a bill for it to become a law. Question 34. Who vetoes bills? The President. The President is the only person who can veto legislative bills. Question 35. What does the President's Cabinet do? Advises the President. The President's Cabinet advises the President. Question 36. What are two Cabinet-level positions? Attorney General and Vice President. There are currently 16 Cabinet-level positions. Two are Attorney General and Vice President. The other 14 positions are secretaries of different departments, such as the Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of Education, and the Secretary of State. Pause the video if you need more time to read through the list. The Executive Branch, Section 3. We will now begin the third section of Lesson 8. The two major political parties in the United States are the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The elephant is the symbol of the Republican Party, and the donkey represents the Democratic Party. Since 1853, all presidents have belonged to one of these two parties. This slide shows the name of the political party the current president belongs to. Besides the two major parties, there are other political parties as well. These are called third parties. Voters and politicians can also choose to be an independent, which means he or she doesn't belong to any political party. For almost all of its history, the United States has had only two major political parties, although the parties and policies have differed over time. Regardless of which two parties they were, they have always been the most successful in elections, particularly national elections. However, there have always been third parties as well. While less influential in national elections, third parties often have more influence in local government. Third parties are important to the political system because they often bring new ideas and policies into national politics. Abolition, women's voting rights, child labor laws, the 40-hour work week, and Social Security were all ideas originally promoted by third parties. In 2020, there were 52 third parties in the United States. Currently, the largest third parties are the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, and the Constitution Party. The Libertarian Party believes in very limited federal government. The most radical form would be a government that only provides police, prisons, courts, and the military. The Green Party promotes grassroots democracy, social justice, nonviolence, and environmentalism. The Constitution Party wants greater power given to the states and a federal government guided by a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Presidential elections are held every 4 years in November. All citizens over the age of 18 can vote for president. Though he could have served longer, the first president, George Washington, set a precedent by serving only 2 terms. Franklin Roosevelt is the only president to have served more than 2 terms. He died in 1945 at the beginning of his 4th term. In 1951, the 22nd Amendment was passed, and now presidents are limited to 2 terms. This is the end of Section 3. We will now practice the related civics questions. Question 26. We elect a president for how many years? 4. A president is elected for 4 years and may serve only 2 terms. Question 27. In what month do we vote for president? November. We vote for president in the month of November. Question 45. What are the 2 major political parties in the United States? The Democratic and Republican parties. The 2 major political parties in the United States are the Republican and the Democratic parties. Question 46. What is the political party of the president now? This slide shows the political party of the president now. Question 54. How old do citizens have to be to vote for president? 18. Citizens have to be 18 or older to vote for president, or any other federal, state, or local election. Question 70. Who was the first president? Washington. The first president of the United States was George Washington. The Executive Branch, Section 4. We will now begin the 4th section of Lesson 8. Presidential elections have 2 steps. The first step is primary elections. Primaries are held when 2 or more candidates from the same party want to be president. For instance, in the 2016 presidential election, there were originally 19 Republican candidates, 7 Democratic candidates, 2 independent candidates, and several third-party candidates. Hillary Clinton won the Democratic primary, and Donald Trump won the Republican primary. They then ran against each other and 2 third-party candidates in the presidential election that November. Presidential primaries are long and complicated. From January until June, candidates campaign from state to state as each state votes for its preferred nominee in each party. As the campaigning and voting progresses, candidates quit, and usually by June there is only 1 candidate remaining in each party. The final candidate from each party is then selected at a national convention and competes in the presidential election in November. Connecticut, like most states, has closed primaries. Closed primaries mean you must be a member of a political party to vote in that party's primary. Around 20 states have open presidential primaries, which allow any registered voter to vote in any primary. In that way, Open primaries are just like state and national elections. You do not have to be a member of a political party to vote in those elections. All federal, state, and local elections, except one, are direct elections. In a direct election, the candidate who receives the most votes wins. However, U.S. presidential elections are indirect elections, which means the candidate with the greatest number of votes is not always the winner. Instead, a body called the Electoral College determines who becomes president. In the Electoral College, each state is given a number of electors equal to its total number of U.S. representatives and senators. For example, Connecticut has 5 representatives and 2 senators, so it has 7 electors. During a presidential election, the candidate who receives the most votes in Connecticut gets all 7 votes. At the end of the presidential election, the candidate with the most electoral votes becomes president. There are a few reasons why the Electoral College was created. One is the idea that it protects against tyranny of the majority by giving smaller states more influence. In the Federalist Papers, James Madison describes the Electoral College as another aspect of federalism. He argues that the House of Representatives is population-based and the Senate state-based. In the same way, the general election is population-based and the Electoral College is state-based. Another reason is the Electoral College was necessary because without it, the slave states would have lost every election. Because there were so many slaves in the South and slaves couldn't vote, the northern states would always have held a majority in a direct election. So far, the Electoral College has chosen the candidate with fewer popular votes 4 times, in 1876, 1888, 2000, and 2016. The Constitution sets up rules in case the president, for whatever reason, can no longer serve. When that happens, the vice president becomes president. If both the president and vice president cannot perform their duties, the Speaker of the House of Representatives becomes president. So far, 8 U.S. presidents have died while in office, and 1 has resigned. This is the current Speaker of the House of Representatives. If you are asked who the Speaker is, you may answer with the Speaker's full name or just give the last name. This is the end of Section 4. We will now practice the related civics questions. Question 31. If both the President and the Vice President can no longer serve, who becomes President? The Speaker of the House of Representatives. If both the President and Vice President can no longer serve, the Speaker of the House of Representatives becomes President. Question 47. What is the name of the Speaker of the House of Representatives? This is the current Speaker of the House. If you are asked this question during your interview, you may answer with the full name or just the last name. This is the end of Lesson 8. Return to the main page to practice the civics questions and dictation from the lesson.